Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah, when he was born, he had very weak eyesight, but then he went completely blind when he was just an infant. So he was just, a baby, and he lost his eyesight completely. And the mother of Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah used to make dua for him, and she used to make dua for him profusely. I mean, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to restore his eyesight. Then a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happens. And keep in mind here, Al Bukhari was not blind for just a month or two. Al Bukhari was blind for a significant amount of time. It could have been 2 or 3 years that he was blind. His mother never gave up hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She continued to make dua. And one night as she's sleeping, she sees Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam comes to her and says to her, Ya hadihi, O so-and-so, Inna Allah yubashiruki, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the glad tidings, Annahu qad radda basar waladik, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has restored the eyesight of your child, li kathrati du'aik. And actually says to her, Ibrahim says to her, because of your dua. Ibrahim alayhi salam says to her, Allah has restored the sight of your child because of your dua. She wakes up, she goes to Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, and as she wakes him up, he opens his eyes and he's looking around, clearly seeing, confused, how is it that he can see and what's going on here, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered that dua. She didn't stop there, she didn't say, oh alhamdulillah, my son can see now, everything is great now we can play, now we can be normal. As the next day when he could see, the first thing she did was she took him to a Sheikh to teach him Quran. So Al Bukhari actually memorized the entire Quran at the age of 6. Okay? So Allahu alam, it seems like his eyesight came back to him when he was 4 or 5 years old. His mother right away took him to Hifd al-Quran. All right, now we got to get you to memorize the Quran. And it wasn't just like, okay, now alhamdulillah, my child can see, he's a trophy hafidh, alhamdulillah. I can put him on the shelf and I can say, everyone, look, I've got a hafidh kid, right? Then she noticed in him a love, just a natural love for the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's sitting in the halaqat of Quran, in the gatherings of Quran, and as soon as he finishes with his Quran, voluntarily he goes and he sits in the halaqat of hadith as well. So he naturally had a love for hadith. So she noticed that in him and she nurtured it. Al Bukhari, and subhanAllah, she used to go drop him in the masjid and she would wait outside the entire time, subhanAllah, and she'd wait for him, she'd use all of her money on him. I mean, she invested her full time in Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala. So when she asked him, she said, is this something that you want to do? You want to sit in the halaqat of hadith? He said, yeah, this is what I want to do. So then she took her money, she used it in putting him in hadith circles, she took him to the hadith scholars of Al Bukhari, because they were there, they just weren't on the level of, Baghdad or so on and so forth. And she starts putting him there. And he had an incredible memory, and everyone recognized that. All of his teachers were amazed by his ability to memorize. And he memorized 7,000 ahadith by the age of 12 years old. Now when I say 7,000 ahadith, I don't mean, he can kind of give you a bootlegged version of a hadith and give you the ma'na, give you the meaning. No, 7,000 ahadith with the chain of narrators without making any mistake, saying who narrated from who narrated from who, and so on and so forth. So he had 7,000 down by the age of 12. By the age of 10, he says about himself, he said, I memorized, he doesn't say I read, he said I memorized the books of Al-Waqi' ibn Jarrah and Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Al-Waqi' ibn Jarrah and Abdullah ibn Mubarak. So Al-Bukhari says I memorized his books. Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala had written books on heart softeners, on tazkiyah, and so on and so forth. So it's amazing. And Abdullah Mubarak is also a scholar of hadith, a scholar of fiqh, and so on and so forth. He said, I memorized all of his books. And when he says he memorized all of his books, he could dictate them from the top of his head. And that also has an impact on his character, because no scholar spoke more about az-zuhd wa raqa'iq, asceticism and heart softening, like Abdullah Mubarak rahimahullah. The most beautiful words and the most beautiful works till today that you find contained in the books of tazkiyah are the words of Abdullah Mubarak rahimahullah. So he's still a child and he's already got that inside of him. Okay? And then on top of that, before, he says about himself, he says before the age of 16 years old, by the time his mother finished taking him around, he said that I documented 1,800 teachers. So he's been through 1,800 scholars just up until the age of 16 years old. His mother has taken him around, subhanAllah, all around the area of Bukhara and Khurasan, and he sat with them and they became his teachers. Now, there are a few stories about him when he was a child, all right, to show you how incredible of a memory he had. First, one of the scholars that he studied with was a man by the name of Al-Imam Al-Dakhili. Al-Imam Al-Dakhili, rahimahullah ta'ala. And Al-Dakhili was considered like one of the most prominent hadith scholars in Bukhara. And Al-Dakhili, he used to write in his own lawh. He used to have his own scrolls and he used to write his own ahadith. And one day, Al-Bukhari is sitting there. Al-Bukhari was only 11 years old. Okay? And he says, حدثنا سفيان عن أبي الزبير عن إبراهيم. So he's going through the chain of narrators. Al-Bukhari raises his hand. He says, Ya Sheikh, inna Abu Zubair lam yarwi an Ibrahim. He said, Sheikh, Abu Zubair has never met Ibrahim. So what are you talking about? Of course he has. And he insisted. Al-Bukhari was like, no, they've never even met. And he says, are you sure what you're talking about? And he got infuriated. Al-Dakhili is like, who's this 11-year-old kid trying to show me up in a halaqah and tell me that these two hadith narrators never met? So he was really mad. He said, Sayyidi, irja' ila al-asl. He said, my master, go ahead and go back to your origin. Because al-lawh, al-dakhili, he used to copy his lawh from all of his notes. He used to put it together for his classes. So he said, go back and see the original copy and see if you find that. So al-dakhili, he made the entire halaqah sit there while he went home, went through his scrolls so he could find that hadith and find that chain and he could come back to him. So here's Al-Bukhari. All the other students are mad at him because they just have to sit there and they're not even getting any ahadith. They're just waiting for their teacher to come back and he's all angry to figure out, whether this 11-year-old kid has a point. So Al-Dakhili comes back laughing. And he says to Al-Bukhari, he says, Ya waladi, oh my son. He says, فَحَدَثَ عَنْ مَنْ إِذًا. So then who did he narrate from? Then what's the correct chain of narrators? Like, how did you figure that out? So he said to him, he says that Sufyan عن الزبير عن عدي عن إبراهيم. So Al-Bukhari gave him the correct chain. He's 11 years old. قال صدقت ونعم الغلام أنت. He said, you've told the truth and what a bright young man you are. وَسَيَكُونُ لَكَ شَأْنٌ. And he looked at him, he said, you're going to have a special status in this ummah. Like you've got a bright future ahead of you. So Dakhili was actually relieved at that, and he was very impressed by him. Now, Al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was still writing at this point. Now, then comes a long period of time where Al-Bukhari just goes and sits in halaqas, and usually in the in the hadith circles, you're sitting there writing like a maniac, you're writing like crazy. Al-Bukhari goes and he doesn't write anymore. So Hashid ibn Ismail is a friend of Al-Bukhari. He was a colleague of his. He says that myself, Al-Bukhari, and a third friend of ours, we used to go when we were young teenagers. So, and he says that this is before we hit puberty. So they're really young teenagers. He said we used to go to the ulama of the different areas in Khurasan to learn the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He says, فَكُنْتُ أَنَا وَصَاحْبِي نَسْمَعْ وَنَكْتُبْ. He says that me and my friends, other than Al-Bukhari, نَسْمَعْ وَنَكْتُبْ. We hear and we write. He says, أَمَّا الْبُخَارِ لَمْ يُدَوِّنْ وَلَمْ يَكْتُبْ. He says, as for Al-Bukhari, he didn't have anything in his hands. He wasn't writing anything. And none of you try to act like you're Al-Bukhari and you make that an excuse right now and say, that's why you don't have any notes. I'm memorizing everything you're saying, right? And iPads don't count, all right? But he said that Al-Bukhari had nothing in his hands. He's got no pen, he's got no papers, no nothing. All right? He says, so one day me and my friend, we were frustrated with him. He said, فَقُلْتُ لَهُ أَنَا وَالْآخَرْ يَوْمًا. He said, me and my friend said to him one time, لِمَاذَا لَا تَكْتُبْ. He said, how come you don't write? And they even insulted him. They said, هَلْ جِيتَ مَعْنَا لِتُضَيِّعْ عُمْرَكَ. Did you come with us to just waste your time? I mean, is this just you killing time? Or are you just coming to be entertained? Right? And when they said that to him, and they kept going off on him, like, are you here تضيع عمرك تضيع أوقاتك? Are you here to waste your time? Are you wasting your life just jumping around halaqas, just hanging out? Like, are you trying to stay away from home? Is that what it is? Why is it that you're just going around these hadith halaqas and you're not doing anything? So Al-Bukhari didn't answer them. They're sitting there going off on him, and he's just smiling at them. He's not saying anything. He says that after a while, as we kept going off on him, and we're walking with him and we're mocking him and making fun of him and like coming up with all these theories as to why he's running away from home and he's not doing anything. He said, Al-Bukhari stopped and he said, listen, إِنَّكُمَا قَدْ أَكْثَرْتُمَا عَلَيَّ. He said, you guys have gone too far now. He says, فَأَعْرِضَا عَلَيَّ مَا كَتَبْتُمَا. Go ahead and read to me everything that you guys wrote. He says, فَأَخْرَجْنَا الْأَلْوَاحِ. So, Hashid says that we took out our scrolls. And he said that we had written down over 15,000 ahadith in them. Okay? 15,000 ahadith. And he says, فَجَعَلَ يَقْرَأ عَنْ ظَهْرِ قَلْبِهِ. He said that Al Bukhari started dictating each and every single one of those ahadith without looking at anything. وَنَحْنُ نُرَاجِعْ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ. And they said we were actually like correcting ourselves after him. Like he was so accurate as we're going through the order of everything that we heard, that we started to even correct ourselves afterwards. And he said we spent that entire day and night, and the only thing that we broke for was salah, was prayer. And he went through all 15,000 ahadith from his head without making a single mistake. And then at the end, ثُمَّ قال, he said to them, أَتَرَوْنِي, he said, do you guys see that I was wasting my time this entire time? Now you guys get it, all right? He says, do you see me, أُضَيِّعُ وَقْتِي, do you see me wasting my time? And he says, Hashid says, فَعَلِمْنَا أَنَّهُ لَنْ يَتَقَدَّمْ عَلَيْهِ أَحَدٍ. Hashid says, we knew that no one was close to this man, that this was a person, this man was special, that there is no one that ever matches this man. Now Al Bukhari sees a dream when he's a child as well, when he's a young teenager as well, that many would actually see of him. Many ulama would see this dream, and Al Bukhari saw. Al Bukhari saw a dream of himself walking behind the Prophet ﷺ. Every time the Prophet ﷺ puts his foot down, Al Bukhari goes and puts his foot down there. And he saw this dream of himself as a young man, and subhanAllah, other ulama, other scholars as well, they saw that dream. Now he continued, and this is something that Al-Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he says is significant. He said Al-Bukhari, he literally exhausted all of the resources in Bukhara before he left. So up until the age of 16 years old, he just stayed in his city, and he literally soaked up everything he could from all of the scholars in Khurasan, all of the scholars in Bukhara. Then he made his way out. So before he journeys around the world, he wanted to make use of his local resources. Sulaym ibn Mujahid, who's another student of Imam Al Bukhari, he says, Sulaym ibn Mujahid says, I entered upon him one day and he was kind of looking up and he was really happy. And Sulaym said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you happy. Why is it that you're smiling? And he said, you just missed a young man. There was a young man that was just sitting here, like he was sitting in my office. And he memorizes 70,000 ahadith. So it went from 7,000 to 70,000 ahadith. So Sulaym said, well, where is he? I want to meet this guy. So Imam Al Bukhari said, he just left. He said, you can find him. And he just left. So Sulaym says, I went out and I started looking around, and he said, I found the Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala. And I said to him, are you the one that claims to memorize 70,000 ahadith? And Imam Al Bukhari, and look, Imam Bukhari has confidence. All right, it's not arrogance, because you'll see his humility. He has confidence. He said, not only do I memorize 70,000 ahadith, he said, I can tell you when each narrator was born, when he died, where he was from, and where he lived. 70,000 ahadith. I'm not just going to tell you who the narrators are. I will tell you their date of birth, their date of death, where they're from, and where they died. And so he said that I tested him, and he said we went through, a couple of thousand ahadith, and I was like, all right, I'm done. All right, I believe this guy is special. So anyway, this is up until the age of 16. Al Bukhari just dominated Khurasan. He dominated that area in the sense that he surpassed his teacher.